Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
I had a lot of people send me this story from roadandtrack.com. Thank you very much. I wrote for roadandtrack.com a while back. Emmett White wrote this story, though. Washington State Patrol to find speeding hotspots using harvested phone data. And, of course, this is going to bother a lot of people. It sounds like Big Brother is watching, even when you drive. So, of course, there's been the long-running battle between drivers and speed limits. But now, here's the issue. Washington State Patrol has revealed it will crack down on speeding by locating areas where fast driving happens based on cell phone data, according to local NBC News affiliate King 5, King 5. It sure sounds frightening, but it's not as enemy of the state as it seems at first, as the way that law enforcement officials in the Evergreen State are using the phone data doesn't involve real-time tracking, and presumably also is anonymized, meaning that they don't know who had which particular signal. But that's the problem. Is this the first step down a long road, or is this exactly the extent of it? Law enforcement is analyzing cell phone data from the year 2023 and using that to identify speeding hotspots across the state. And then after buying telematic data gathered by a group called the Michelin Mobility Intelligence, Washington State Patrol officials have been able to determine where drivers were speeding, braking, texting, and talking while behind the wheel. Essentially, the gathered data will be used to see where drivers have previously felt comfortable doing things like speeding, and then they're going to up the enforcement in those areas. So they're saying, hey, look, we bought the data. It's just the data of all the phone usage in this area a couple years ago. We don't know who's on which phone. We don't know that. But we can tell a lot of people are speeding here, or they're talking on their phones here, or they're texting and driving here. And, of course, the talking on the phone thing, can they tell if you're doing it hands-free or not? I'm curious. This is so exciting, says the acting director of the Washington Traffic Safety Commission. This is so exciting to be using data we haven't had access to before. This is predictive as opposed to reflective. It's predictive? Really? Using data from 2 years ago is predictive? I can predict the past. Specific locations of increased enforcement include I-5 from Joint Base Lewis McChord to Fife, and then from Fife to Auburn, north and south of Everett on I-5, and a 14-mile stretch of I-90, both east and west of downtown Spokane. The data used to hone on those areas included over 1 million cell phone users in the state. However, it's not clear, of course, if the data was limited to Washington residents or all cell phone users that went through those different areas. And again, I suspect it was just all cell phone users because that's much easier to gather. So this is not the first time this sort of surveillance state initiative has been pondered as a way to deal with vehicular use. A 2023 study from the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety advocated for the use of roadside cameras and cell phone data to track instances of distracted driving. Their research indicates that some drivers are using their phones for up to 3% of their total drive time, which is worrying. Although talking hands-free, I don't see the problem with that. I think talking hands-free on my phone is the same as talking to the person in the seat next to me. But the independent safety watchdog admitted that such practices were likely to be unpopular, that is, tracking people through the cell phone usage data. So how the residents of Washington react to the use of harvested cell phone data to better track down speeders remains to be seen. I have several concerns about this, though. And one of them is I'm not sure how accurate this data is. And you might say, Steve, it's digital, it's cellular. How could that not be accurate? And I'm just going to throw some things out there. And again, these are anecdotes, meaning that, I'm not saying that what I'm about to describe happens to everybody in every instance. But I've run the Free Press Marathon a couple times. And I routinely run that either wearing a GPS watch, which I did for many, many years. This is not a GPS watch, but it is, in fact, a watch. And I've also had a cell phone in a holster clipped to my waistband. And I routinely will run some kind of tracking program so that when the race is over, I can look at the data and see what my time was per mile and so on. And I've done it before. I've downloaded the track that I ran, and you'd think the track I ran, which was laid out by course officials, would correspond with the data on whatever I'm using to track my progress that day. And I can tell you there are places on the course where I'm running in a straight line and all of a sudden the thing goes deet, 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 deet. And I'm talking about if you were to look at it like this, okay? And it looks like I'm zigzagging around the course. And of course, what's actually happening there is I'm running between extremely tall buildings in downtown Detroit. And running between extremely tall buildings in downtown Detroit means that some of the things that provide the data that I'm recording aren't being recorded properly. The satellites aren't wrong. My phone is simply getting incomplete data, or the watch I was wearing was somehow doing that. And I wonder about that kind of a thing, is exactly how accurate is the data that says you were doing this fast for this stretch of time. I'm just wondering about that. But the biggest problem of all, obviously, is that all this data exists. And it was years ago that we'd think it wouldn't matter if somebody could track this kind of data, because storing it or sorting it or tracking it down would be so cumbersome that it'll never be done. Okay? So if it's never going to get done, why would we care about it? But as we know now, they've got these huge data storage centers the size of the Pentagon, and they can store all this data, and then they can dig through it and find all kinds of neat information about you, where you go, where you've been, all this stuff. And now you realize, oh, it's out there, and they're actually using it for something. The next obvious step is, could they contact the people who've got the information and go, do you have any instances in the last 6 months of someone driving over 100 miles an hour on one of these roads? Simple question. And I suspect there's a real simple way for them to say yes or no. And if they run the data and come back and go yes, isn't the next obvious step for them to say, who was it and where were they driving? And can you send us the data? And there are two groups of people that would be able to do that and be able to do something with it. One is obviously law enforcement. So if law enforcement said, hey, we ran some data and discovered that according to your phone, you were doing 100 miles an hour out on this road, and we don't think you were running. And then, of course, the insurance companies. Now, insurance companies have already got some people agreeing to let their movements be tracked using this kind of data. But they say, if you want lower insurance rates, let us put this little thing on your car and track how you drive. And then, of course, you know you're being watched, so you drive better, hopefully, and get a lower insurance rate. I know some people, if they got one of those things, it would destroy their insurance rates. But that's the concern. And so if you said, Steve, this right here is the most that's ever going to happen. They're going to look at the anonymized data of every single cell phone out there, and they have no idea whose cell phone it is. But it seems a whole bunch of them are texting and driving right here. So we're going to start enforcing don't text and drive right there. That wouldn't bother me that much. It still bothers me a little. I'm a firm believer that the data and information about my life should belong to me, and the data and information about your life should belong to you. I personally think that data brokers who sell people's data should be forced to disclose that they're doing it to the person whose data they're selling, and to be forced to actually share some of the profits. But as of right now, I'm being outvoted by everybody, it seems. But I think a lot of people would get on board with that idea if they thought it was possible. But unfortunately, the data brokering companies have more power and more influence in Washington, D.C. and the various state capitals than you or I do. And so that probably will never happen. But this data does exist. It could be linked to drivers, and it's not being done that way right now, but who's to say it won't happen that way? And that's my concern. So it's a fascinating story. Emmett White wrote this, like I said, for roadandtrack.com. Whole bunch of people sent it to me. Thank you very much. Washington State Patrol to find speeding hotspots using harvested phone data. And the question is this it or what's next? Because what's next could get very scary. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. Do memory foam mattresses wish they could forget?